Treasure Island by Robert Louis Stevenson. Chapter 32. The Treasure Hunt. The Voice Among the Trees. Partly from the dampening influence of this alarm, partly to rest Silver and the sick folk, the whole party sat down as soon as they gained the brow of the ascent. The plateau being somewhat tilted towards the west, this spot on which we had paused commanded a wide prospect on either hand before us. Over the tree-tops we beheld the cape of the woods, fringed with surf. Behind, we were not only looked down upon the anchorage of the skeleton island, but we saw clear across the spit and the eastern lowlands, a great field of open sea upon the east. Sheer above us rose the spyglass, yeah, here dotted with single pines, and there black with precipices. There were no sound but that of the distant breakers, mountaining from all round, and the chirps of countless insects in the brush. Not a man, not a sail upon the sea. The very largeness of the view increased the sense of solitude. Silver, as he sat, took certain bearings with his compass. "There are 3 tall trees," said he, "about in the right line of the skeleton island. Spyglass shoulder, I take it, means at the lowest pint here. It's child play to find stuff now. I've got half a mind to dine first." "I don't feel sharp," growled Morgan. "Thinkin' o' Flint. I think it were as done as me." "Ah, well, my son, you praise your stars he's dead," said Silver. "He was an ugly devil," cried a third pirate, with a shudder. "That blue in the face, too." "That was how the rum took him," added Mary. "Blue? Well, I reckon he was blue. That's a true word." Ever since they had found the skeleton and had gotten upon this train of thought, they thought, spoken lower and lower. They almost got to a whispering by now, so that the sound of their talk hardly interrupted the silence of the wood. All of a sudden, out of the middle of the trees in front of us, a thin, high, trembling voice struck up a well-known air and words. 15 men on a dead man's chest. Yo ho ho and a bottle of rum. I'd never seen men more dreadfully affected than the pirates. The color went from their faces like enchantment. Some leaped to their feet. Some clawed hold of others. Morgan groveled on the sand. "It's Flint!" "By!" cried Mary. The song stopped suddenly as began, broken off, and you would have said, in the middle of a note, as though someone had laid his hand upon the singer's mouth. Coming as far through the clear sunny atmosphere, the green tree-tops, I thought it might have sounded airily and sweet, and the effect on my companions was stranger. "Come," said Silver, struggling with his ashen lips to get the words out. "This won't do. Stand by to go about. This is the rum start, and I can't name the voice, but it's someone skylarking, someone that's flesh and blood, and you may lay it at that." His courage come back as he spoke, and some of the color to his face along with it. Already some of the others had begun to lend an ear to his encouragement, and were coming a little to themselves. But when the same voice broke out again, not this time not singing, but a faint distant hail, that echoed yet fainter among the clefts of the spyglass. "Darby McGraw!" it wailed, for that is the word that best describes the sound. "Darby McGraw! Darby McGraw!" Again and again and again. Then rising a little higher, and with an oath that I leave out, "Fetch aft the rum, Darby!" And the buccaneers remained footed on the ground, their eyes starting from their heads. Long after the voice had died away, they still fixed its silence. Dreadfully before them, that fixes it, gasps one. "Let's go." "They were his last words," moaned Morgan, "his last words above board." Dick had his Bible out, and was playing volubly. He had well brought up, as Dick, before he came to sea and fell among bad companions. Still, Silver was unconquered. I could hear his teeth rattle in his head, but he had not yet surrendered. "Nobody in here's islands ever heard of Darby," he muttered. "Not one but us that's here." And then, making a great effort, "Shipmates," he cried, "I'm here to get that stuff, and I will not be beat by a man nor devil. I was never feared for Flint in his life, and by the powers, I'll face him dead. There's 700,000 pounds not a quarter of a mile from here. When did a gentleman of fortune show stern that much dollars for a boozy old seaman with a blue mug, and him dead too? But there was no sign of reawakening courage in his followers, rather indeed of growing terror at the irreverence of his words. "Belay there, John," said Mercy. "Don't you cross the spirit." And the rest were all too terrified to reply. They would have to run away severally as they dared, but fear kept them together and kept them close behind John, as if his daring helped them, and he, on his part, had pretty well fought the weakness down. "Spirit? Well, maybe," he said. "There's not one thing not clear to me. There was an echo. Now, no man has ever seen a spirit with a shadow. Well then, what's he doin' with an echo to him? Like I should know? That ain't nature, surely." This argument seemed weak enough to me, but you can never tell what will affect the superstitious, and to my wonder, George Merry was greatly relieved. "Well, that's so," he said. "You've a head upon your shoulders, John, and no mistake. 'Bout shipmates, this here crew is on a wrong track, I do believe, and come to think on it, it was like Flint's voice, I grant you, but not so clear a way like it, after all. It was a liker somebody else's voice. Now, it was liker. By the powers, Bengun!" roared Silver. "Aye, and so it were," cried Morgan, springing on his knees. "Bengun it were. And now don't make much odds, do it now?" asked Dick. "Bengun's not here in the body, any more'n Flint." But the older hands greeted in this mark with scorn. "Why, nobody minds Bengun," cried Mary. "Dead or alive, nobody minds him." It was an extraordinary how their spirits had returned, and how the natural colour had revived in their faces. As soon as they were chatting together, with the intervals of listening, not long after, hearing no further sounds, they shouldered into the tools and set forth again, and Mary walking into the forest with Silver's compass to keep them on the right line of Skeleton Island. He had said the truth. Dead or alive, nobody minded Benkin. Dick alone still held his Bible, and looked around him as he went with the fearful glances, and found no sympathy, and Silver even joked about him on his precautions. "I told you," said he. "I told you you'd spill your Bible. It ain't no good to swear by, and what you suppose the spirit wouldn't get for that? Not that," he snapped, his fingers halting in a moment in a stretch. But Dick was not comforted. Indeed, it was soon plain to me that the lad was falling sick, hastened by heat, exhaustion, and the shock of his alarm. The fever, predicted by Dr. Livesey, was evidently growing swiftly higher. It was fine, open walking here. Upon the summit of our way lay a little downhill, for, as I said, the plateau tilted towards the west, and the pines a great small and grew wide apart. Even between the clumps of the nutmeg and Alesia, wide open spaces baked in the hot sunshine, striking as we did pretty the northwest of the island. As we drew, on the one hand, even nearer under the shoulders of the spyglass, and on the other looked even wilder over the western bay, I had once tossed and trembled in the coracle. The first of the tall trees was reached, and by the bearing proved one wrong, so within seconds the third rose nearly 200 feet into the air above a clump of underwood, a giant of a vegetable, and a red brick column as big as a cottage, and wide shadow around it as which a company could have maneuvered. It was conspicuous far to see both the east and west, and might have been entered as a sailing mark upon the chart. But it was not its size that now impressed my companions. It was the knowledge that 700 pounds in gold lay somewhere buried below its spreading shadow. And the thought of money as they grew nearer swallowed up the previous terrors. Their eyes burned in their heads, their feet grew speedier and lighter. Their whole soul was bound up in that fortune, a whole lifetime of extravagance and pleasure, that awaited in the ground for each of them. Silver hobbled, grunting on his crotch. Nostrils stood out and quivered. He cursed like a madman when the flies settled on his hot, shiny countenance, and he plucked fiercely at the line and held me to him. And from time to time he looked his eyes upon me with a deadly look. Certainly he had no pains to hide his thoughts, and certainly I read them like a print. In the immediate nearness of the gold, all else had been forgotten. His promise and the doctor's warning were both things of the past, and I could not doubt that he hoped to seize upon the treasure, find and board the Hispaniola under cover of the night, cut every honest throat about that island, and sail away as he had in first intended, laden with crimes and riches. Shaken as I was with these alarms, it was hard for me to keep up with the rapid pace of the treasure hunters. Now again I stumbled, and it was then that Silver plucked so roughly at the rope and launched me his murderous glances. Dick, who had dropped behind us, was now brought up the rear, babbling to himself both prayers and curses. As his fever kept rising, this also added to my wretchedness, and, to crown all, I was haunted by the thought of the tragedy that had once been acted on the plateau. That when that ungodly buccaneer with a blued face, he who died at the savannah, singing and shouting for drink, had there, with his own hand, cut down his 6 accomplices. This grove, now that was so peaceful, must have rung with cries. And I thought, even with the thought that I could believe I was still ringing it still. We were now at the margin of the thicket. "Huzza, mates, all together!" shouted Mary, and the foremost broke into a run. Suddenly, not 10 yards further, we beheld them stop. A low cry arose. Silver doubled his paces, digging away with his foot in his crutch like one possessed. In the next moment he and I had also come to a dead halt. Before us was a great excavation, not very recent, for the sides had fallen and grass sprouted on the bottom. This was shaft picking and broken in two, and boards of several packing cases strewn together. One of these boards I saw branded with hot iron the name Walrus, the name of Flint's ship, and all was cleared to probation. The cash had been found and rifled. £700 were gone.